It seems like the Russia people has kind of steadied, and so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Well, welcome to today's webinar on making CMMC 2.0 affordable for SMBs. The focus of today's discussion will be on how to make CMMC 2.0 compliance simple and affordable for small to medium businesses in the defense industrial base. We will talk about ways to facilitate your journey and get you started with compliance with our 4 speakers today, our 3 speakers, more of the MC here. But before I jump into introductions, let me just give a quick overview of what we'll be discussing today. So we're going to start by giving a brief overview of CMMC 2.0, how it has changed from the original 1.0, and how those changes make for a simpler and more affordable compliance journey. We'll then talk about how companies can do their best to prepare for CMMC 2.0, and again, focusing on affordable ways that they can make that preparation possible. And lastly, we are going to focus on a case study with SAWTST that shows how this compliance is possible. And we'll talk about how SAWTST went on that compliance journey to get a near perfect score in their NIST compliance. So joining me today, I have an illustrious crowd, an illustrious set of speakers. Let me start by introducing my new friend, Taiye Lambo. He is the founder and CTO of eFortresses. eFortresses is a Gartner 2013 Cool Vendor. They are an AI-powered cybersecurity SaaS company that allows customers to self-assess, get validated, get trained, and get certified to minimize their breach probability at a fraction of the time and cost. Welcome, Taiye. I'm also joined by my friend Kevin Dodson from SAWTST. He is a compliance officer at SAWTST. SAWTST is a defense contractor that provides customized IT solutions that organizations can use to coordinate and manage their supply chain and logistics operations. SAWTST is also a Department of Veteran Affairs verified service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and with a legacy built on service. And last but not least is my friend and colleague at PreVeil, Sanjeev Verma, who is the co-founder of PreVeil since 2015. PreVeil is a simple, inexpensive, and secure document collaboration and email platform for storing and sharing CUI and ITAR data. So let's begin today's conversation with you, Taiye, and why don't you provide us with an overview of CMMC 2.0 and how it makes for a simpler and more affordable path to compliance.
Thank you so much, Arlie. First of all, I really wanted to say I'm excited about this opportunity to present to the SMB community on a very topical issue, obviously CMMC 2.0. Very, very thankful for the opportunity to partner with Arlie and Sanjeev, our friends at PreVeil, as well as our customer, Kevin Dodson at SAWTST. So very, very excited about the opportunity. So I just wanted to state that. CMMC, obviously, as we know, it's probably the only, I would say the first truly maturity-based cybersecurity certification. So as an industry, you know, the cybersecurity industry has seen several certification programs that are trying to minimize risk when it comes to cybersecurity. And I'm referring to like a organizational certification. So it all started out, quite frankly, with the British standards 7799, which then became the ISO standards. And then in parallel with that, the NIST, NIST here in the US was actually publishing what they call special publications, right? So CMMC is really an evolution of maybe 20 to 30 years worth of effort, you know, to minimize information security risk or cybersecurity risk. So it's nothing like completely new, you know, it kind of builds upon other frameworks, especially the NIST Special Publication 800-171, right? So it's evolved over time. So in the past 2 years, we've had 2 major releases of CMMC. The first one being CMMC 1.0, and the latest one is now CMMC 2.0. So as an SMB, and I'm going to assume that a lot of our attendees that made it to this live webinar, maybe listening after the fact, actually work for an SMB or own a small, to medium-sized businesses, or have customers that are small to medium-sized businesses. So that's my assumption, right? So what CMMC does, it gives SMBs the opportunity to have a seat at the table. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So in the past, a lot of certifications were pretty much all or nothing, right? So if you were ISO 27001 certified, you were required to address, 100 plus what we call controls. You didn't have to implement all the controls. In some cases, you've justified the ones that you're going to implement, and then you justify the ones that you need to exclude from your scope. But the challenge is for most small, medium-sized businesses, and when I say small to medium-sized businesses, I mean companies with between 5 and maybe 500 employees, obviously depending on revenue, right? But typically 5 to 500 employees, and in some cases up to 1,000 employees. The challenge with previous certification programs is that it was all or nothing, right? You literally had to pretty much select the controls that a Fortune 500 or even a Fortune 50 would have to address, right? So, and I have a friend, a really good CISO friend of mine, who always uses the analogy of, if you go to like amusement park, like Six Flags here in Georgia, you have to be tall enough to ride, some of the amazing things they have in Six Flags. What CMMC does, it doesn't say you have to be just that one height. It gives you different levels that you could be compliant to, and it allows you to potentially have a seat at the table. And when I say a seat at the table, it pretty much means it allows you as an SMB to have a piece of what I call the DoD defense industrial base pie. Currently, the DoD, I think the last budget for current fiscal year was $700 billion plus. I think it's something like 716 or 750 billion. So the DoD obviously realized that supply chain is one of the most critical aspects, or it could be a weak link for them, or it could be a strong link. It's a very critical aspect of the DoD in terms of their mission and what they're trying to do. So what they've done is they've come out with the CMMC program. Initially it was CMMC 1.0 that has 5 levels of maturity. And at the lowest level, you only have to implement 17 practices. So what they realized is that even those 5 levels were a little bit daunting for most SMBs. So in October-November timeframe, they decided they were going to publish or revamp, and I like to say tweak CMMC to make it more SMB friendly. So they solicited, hundreds of comments, from the small business community, and they eventually said, okay, we're going to streamline the process. We're only going to have 3 levels of CMMC. So to me, as a small business owner, as an advocate for small businesses, a lot of my virtual CISO clients are small businesses. Even though I grew up in the Fortune 500, Fortune 50 world and enterprise world, I feel like, this is probably the best shot that any small business has at achieving a maturity-based certification program that truly helps them to address risk and minimize risk, and happens to be a competitive or could be a competitive advantage. And now, if a SMB chooses not to take advantage of this and they want to be in the defense industrial base as a supplier, whether it's a sub to the prime, up to like the 10th level, what they're going to end up running into is a situation where they may actually be the ones responsible for discriminating against themselves, right? So it's become really more of a, it will become a must-have, once the DFAS rules, the rulemaking process has been completed for CMMC 2.0, from level 1 to 3. So I just wanted to just state that up front that, eFortresses and my team at eFortresses are very, very strong advocates for SMBs because we're an SMB ourselves. So we feel the pain. We know the struggles. We know the challenges that SMBs face, especially within the underserved or underrepresented communities. So Orly, if you could please move to the next slide. All right, so let's talk specifically about CMMC 2.0. So remember I talked about a good friend of mine, Russell Eubanks, shout out to Russell, who actually likes to use the analogy of, are you tall enough to ride, to go on that ride in the amusement park like Six Flags. So what CMMC does, it allows you to start at, if you're not 6 foot tall, which would be like level 3, maybe you're 5 foot tall, right? And you can at least play, you can have I call it a seat at the table, within the CMMC or Department of Defense and industrial base, the DOD Defense Industrial Base. So you can at least say, okay, I'm going to start at level 1. Having said that, if you really want to do this right, where you really want to be as an SMB from a competitive standpoint is you want to be at a level 2. Why do I say that? Level 1 is really more of a self-assessment. It's like basic, very, very basic cyber hygiene. It doesn't entrust you, or the DOD wouldn't entrust. Maybe there may be some exceptions. But typically they wouldn't entrust you with what they call CUI, controlled unclassified information, unless you are at least a level 2. So they may entrust you with FCI, right? But not CUI. So if you really want to get the best bang for your buck, you really want to shoot for level 2. And level 2 is 110 practices. And these are the 110 practices in NIST Special Publication 800-171. So, so this chart just basically shows that that's really where you want to be. If you want to start anywhere that is worth starting at, it'll be at level 2. So it's every 3 years, you're going to get assessed or audited by a third party, right? So the good thing is, with CMMC 2.0, they actually allow you to have a POAM, which is a plan of action and milestones, which is actually good because with 1.0, they were talking about all or nothing. You had to pretty much meet all 110 practices. Now, there's a little bit of flexibility. I think it's like 6 months, depending on how critical those practices are in terms of prioritization. But they do give you the opportunity to at least continuously improve and address any potential gaps. So I would say that's really good news for SMBs. That's very welcoming news because to me, it levels the playing field, right? It's no longer all or nothing. You have an opportunity to have a really good shot at being CMMC level 2. Obviously, that would require undergoing an independent third-party assessment. So I completely understand there's cost implications, right? But if you're an SMB that leverages the cloud for your workload, quite frankly, a lot of those controls you can actually inherit from your cloud service provider. And Kevin is going to be sharing a little bit about that from a perspective of an SMB that is going through this process. So I think that's all I had. I know I've said a lot, and please feel free to type in your questions, and we'll be taking the questions during the Q&A. So on that note, Orly, I'll pass this back to you.
All right. So I think now we'll talk about how companies can really go through this process of taking this new CMMC 2.0 and get ready for it in a simple and an affordable way. And Santi, why don't you get started and take our listeners through that journey? You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Orly. And thank you, Taiye, for the introduction. I want to reiterate a couple of points that Taiye made. That for most companies in the defense industrial base, it is imperative for you to be on level 2 if you intend to be a serious player and hold controlled unclassified information. If you hold CUI, you got to be at level 2. The second point I want to reiterate is that the CMMC 2.0 makes a very significant simplification for you. Again, reiterating what Taiye said. In order to achieve level 2 compliance, you got to meet 110 controls. The previous CMMC 1.0 program essentially said that you got to be perfect. But now you don't have to be perfect. So you can go ahead, make a very good showing. And if you have, for example, 110 to achieve and you achieved 90 or 95, as long as the areas that you're missing are non-critical, you get time, approximately 6 months, to rectify any shortcomings. So it gives you the opportunity either to self-audit yourself or to go through an external audit, and you don't need to be perfect, and that makes life a lot simpler. So with that in mind, let's now delve into how you can, as an SMB, go through what is still a daunting and complex program, and how can you make it simple, and how can you make it affordable? So let's start with simplifying things. The purpose of CMMC at level 2 is to protect controlled and classified information. And oftentimes people get confused by the emphasis on compliance by misunderstanding that compliance is the way to demonstrate that you are securing your CUI. It's the essential thing that you're striving for, but at the heart of the program is that you got to protect the CUI. So the CMMC 2.0 makes attaining level 2.0 compliance simpler and less expensive. And we're going to show you a 3-step program on how to achieve it. I'm also going to start by saying that we've got experience with this. So last year, a PreVeil customer was audited for these 110 controls for NIST 800 by DIBCAC, which is the Department of Defense's most advanced cybersecurity assessment center. And they achieved 110 out of 110, which is a perfect score. So what's the way in which this 3-step program works? Okay, since the purpose of the program is to protect CUI, and your CUI is generally in the form of files and emails, you may want to start first by deploying a system that protects the CUI. There are multiple systems out there. GCC High is one of them, and they are expensive and complex systems. PreVeil is an alternative and a leading system, particularly for SMBs, and here's why it's chosen. First, you can deploy PreVeil in a matter of hours. And when you do so, what you get is an encrypted email system and an encrypted drive system. Think of the encrypted drive as like a OneDrive or a Google Drive. And once you drag and drop your CUI or the new programs, simply create your folders in PreVeil Drive. Now your CUI is secure. It just took you a couple of hours. And because of just those couple of hours, you saved a lot of time and a lot of money, because also you were only deploying PreVeil to those employees that handle CUI. You don't need to go and deploy it to everybody. I emphasize that the purpose of the program is security, and what differentiates PreVeil is its tight security model. It is using what's called zero trust security, so that all of your emails and all of your files are end-to-end encrypted by default. You cannot break the system through passwords, and you cannot break it through admins. And so in a simple step, you get a very strong security for your CUI. The system meets NIST 800-171 requirements. PreVeil is a cloud service, it's a SaaS service, and it meets DFARS requirements. For example, it's FedRAMP moderate equivalent, which it must be. It uses FIPS encryption, and it meets DFAR 7012 C through G. And that's an alphabet soup, but we're going to talk more about it. Once you've deployed PreVeil in a couple of hours, what do you get? Remember, your goal is 110. Since PreVeil addresses approximately 85 of the 110 controls, either fully or partially, once you deploy PreVeil, you get a baseline SPRS or NIST 800-171 score of approximately 40. Again, the scoring is from -203 to +110. So in an hour's time or so, you're approximately at 40. Once you got your CUI secured, you now need to think about compliance. And compliance in CMMC means that you have to develop what's called a system security plan to demonstrate to an auditor that you are actually compliant. So how PreVeil helps is that it provides you with a complete documentation set addressing these 85 full or partial controls that we work on, so that your job is simplified. You don't need to develop the documentation from scratch. You get the documentation along with the PreVeil deployment. So in an hour's time, you get the documentation, you get a strong baseline score, and the documentation is very extensive. It's about 200 pages dealing with 85 controls. If you were to typically go and get yourself to develop this doc set, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, but it comes with the PreVeil system. And what's nice is when you've deployed this, you're not only addressing NIST 800-171 and CMMC, but as an end-to-end encrypted system, those of you that handle ITAR, you're also now having a system that can allow you to share data, files, emails for ITAR as well. So now that you've got yourself the baseline score, the baseline documentation for your system security plan, you're now in a good position to say, okay, what are the gaps now and how do I rectify them? The gaps that remain, fortunately, are mostly addressed by policies and procedures and a few technology choices. And here's where eFortresses, SaaS, and VC service comes in. So they already now know that if you've deployed PreVeil, they already know that you've already got a basic system security plan with full documentation, and they're familiar with that. So now their job is not to start you from -203, but your job is now simpler to start you from 40. And they now know that what you've got to address are mostly policies, procedures, etc. And given their deep experience and their SaaS platform, they'll now work on those gaps and in a modest amount of effort, get you to 100 plus, odd score. Again, these may vary based on your specific requirements, but these are general guidelines. And so when you do that, you're ready for an audit, either an internal audit or an external audit. And this is again where the benefit of CMMC 2.0 comes in. You don't need to be 110 perfect before the audit. As long as you're close enough, you understand that you have a few gaps, it's okay to have gaps because you can always rectify those even after the audit using a program of actions and milestones, or eFortresses will sort of conduct a rough audit for you, tell you what those programs of actions and milestones will be, and over the next 3 to 6 months, you can go and rectify. So it's a really powerful 3-step program where in an hour, you get yourself to deploy the protection for the CUI, you get the basic system security plan in place, then you start working with eFortresses, who will then take you to the final step of addressing the gaps and getting to a solid score, 90, 100, or in that vicinity. And now you're ready either for an internal audit or an external audit. And more importantly, if you are a defense contractor, you've got to recognize and remember that you are already required to meet these NIST 800-171 controls. When you sign your contract, you agree that you're actually going to go and adhere to NIST 800-171, the 110 controls. So you're now in good standing with your current requirements. So what's nice about it is that you can get going now because Number one, it fulfills your existing obligations because you said that you were compliant with 110. But by doing these simple steps, you're now also ready for CMMC 2.0 because it's the same 110 controls. And finally, you've got a platform that is also enabling you to handle ITAR data. And that's what gets you to your journey of 110. And because these steps are streamlined, we expect the costs that you will incur to be under $20,000 for an organization of 50 users or below. It can be substantially lower if you are smaller, obviously, on the scale, but to just give you some understanding, you're 50 users or so in this 3-step program, you're talking about 20 grand and you're ready for compliance. So with that, I'm going to go pass it on to the next step, which is, Kevin and SAWTST have gone through this process. They basically, are an SMB, use the PreVeil system and work with eFortresses and got themselves into a good standing. I think much better than the 100 that I spoke about. So over to them for, their experience with this program. And I'll just conclude by saying and reiterating that any SaaS service that you will be using to be compliant must meet FedRAMP baseline moderate equivalent or have an ATO. It must be using FIPS 140-2 validated encryption and must ensure compliance with DFAR 7012C through G. And again, of course, the PreVeil system does that. And you inherit all of those benefits by the simple use of the platform, which you can get going with in an hour. Happy to take more questions on that. And we'll be providing you obviously with a full document. That's the PreVeil CMMC 2.0 white paper that goes into, for those of you that are compliance experts or want to get into the details, it goes control by control for all the 110 controls, tell you exactly which ones we meet, how we meet them, and why we meet them. And at the end of this webinar, you'll be receiving an email with that platform and the white paper. So thanks for the opportunity, Orly.
So Taiye, I think, Kevin, why don't we go off to you, and then we can hear your case study, and then we will talk a bit about a couple of summary lessons and then take some questions.
Absolutely. Well, like we said, my name is Kevin Dodson. I'm the compliance officer for SAWTST. We are a DoD vendor specializing in IT and logistics solutions for multiple Department of Defense, Navy, Army, several others. Part of our journey was to take our system, understanding that CUI was all over the place for us, from our contracts to the information that go back and forth between us and other designated parties. And we determined that CMMC would be a differentiator for us going after a variety of government contracts as we seek to grow our business over the next 5 years. So with us, being so heavy in the space, we decided, or I decided, that it was important that we move on the CMMC piece. So we worked with eFortresses to evaluate our current standing, look at our controls, how they were being met, and I was introduced to PreVeil during this time. And after comparing it with several other options or opportunities, and also looking at how I secure our own internal systems, which we use, Office 365 for our operations, it was important. Some of the things that came out for me were that our MSP, or our service provider for our systems, would be in scope for any CMMC assessment that we would go in through. And the only way to remove some of the vulnerabilities that go along with that, meaning that, our SharePoint access admins may have access to our information, and we need to keep that out of anyone's hand except for our controlled staff internally. After looking at the PreVeil solution, understanding that it was an absolute bolt-on, I didn't have to do any configuration when it came to our email systems. It bolted right in. Once we implemented PreVeil, we very quickly were able to get the number of user licenses we use. We have up to 500 people, but we only needed to have 2021 of our corporate staff team added to the PreVeil environment. And by adding that PreVeil solution into the Outlook and having that bolted on into our security platform, also having the back end piece that goes with it, we were able to very quickly address the 75 controls that PreVeil addressed for us at the time. It's actually gone up since then, but initially it was 75, and we were looking to get to, at that time, this was CMMC 1.0 that we're trying to address. So we had to get to 130 controls versus the 110 plus that they had now, which obviously that would be level 3 for where they are. Long story short, with very little effort, energy, and cost associated with actually getting it, I was pleasantly surprised at the breadth of documents that were provided when we got the solution. So I did have a number of templates that I could adjust some of our documents to make sense, to also include what we were doing with PreVeil, our procedures, and adding that to our document repository. We were very quickly able, initially we were at something like 102 controls just off of us doing what we had to do, and I had to, make some adjustments from a document standpoint and review. I'm very proud to say that we are well above the 110 controls now after having some time following the implementation to upgrade our policies, procedures, reevaluate our systems, and put some additional internal controls with our businesses in place to very quickly get us into compliance and very comfortable with where we are in our DoD journey. So if I had to say anything, it was truly a breeze from an implementation standpoint, the communication piece, understanding just what was secured, and then it's just communicating with your internal team what needs to go where. And I am the administrator for our team, and I can confirm that I don't have any visible access to any of the information that's contained with our other team members, other than to say, if they lose an encryption key or if somebody tries to get their equipment or something like that, I would be the one they call. We work together to re-authenticate them on their system, but I'm not vulnerable in any way to information that I'm not supposed to have. So that made this whole process very much reassuring and comfortable from a SMB standpoint.
So Kevin, thank you very much for that. Couple of follow-up questions. You never want to ask someone about how much money they make or how much their compliance journey costs. But if you could give us kind of a sense of how much where were you budgeting for compliance, and approximately what ballpark you were looking at in terms of getting your compliance, getting to the end of your compliance journey?
Yeah, I did my due diligence. I prepared a financial report, and I can honestly tell you that the median value for an assessment coming into our environment was around $35,000 to $40,000. I think one or two on the lower end were 25,000 was, I think, second to the lowest. But the PreVeil solution was by far less expensive for us, our environment, and in the long run, far less time consuming, considering what we had to do to get into position to be valuable. So it is like Sanjeev said, it was less than $20,000, I could say that. And it was worth every penny that we went through to have it put in place. I feel like the team didn't balk at the cost. No one cried at the end of the day, understanding that each of the contracts that we pursue, anyone who's in the DoD space knows that the contracts are for, multi-million dollars. And so in the grand scheme of it, having the ability to say that we can meet those contractual requirements of CMMC without worrying about whether or not we're going to lose our current contracts or not be able to bid on new coming contracts was definitely a breath of fresh air. It took a lot of angst out of the process.
If I could, I'd like to echo for the audience that the SAWTST example is a case study in excellence, competitiveness, and peace of mind. So what Kevin has just done for SAWTST as a compliance officer is that, number one, he implemented a system, as he mentioned, in a straightforward and simple manner that got him compliant with his current DFARS requirement. Remember, every defense contractor that is bidding or has bid on an accepted defense contract is required, and they have signed and said, look, we comply with the 110 requirements if we handle CUI. So by implementing the system, number one, he is fully meeting the requirements of DFARS, so that if any program officer says, do you meet the 110 controls that you said that you did under your current contract? His answer is yes. What's also nice is because he did what we believe is the right thing. He protected his CUI, got himself ready for being compliant under current DFARS requirements. The CMMC 2.0 journey came along for the ride. It's nothing that complicated to go beyond where he already is. And I also like analogies and say, look, you could, look at it as if you're looking at an SAT. I'm just going to, at the last minute, go cram for the SAT. Or if you basically go and prepare yourself with a good program during the years leading up to the SAT, the rest of it just sort of falls through. So what SAWTST finds itself in is great peace of mind, because if they're audited tomorrow, they're good. If they're audited next year, they're good. Or if their program doesn't require an external audit, they can also basically self-attest and say, here we are, ready for CMMC 2.0, because they are in an exceptional position with controls. And what's nice is by working with eFortresses, it's not just Kevin who's saying, take my word that I'm compliant, but he has a practiced CISO in the form of Taiye looking over his shoulder and agreeing, yes, you've got the controls. So it's a really nice example that if you take the steps that are necessary under your current requirements, CMMC 2.0 is not a big deal for you. It's not a big problem for you going forward.
And thank you, Sanjeev. Kevin, before we open up the conversation a little bit further and start answering some of the questions, I'm wondering if you can just give a summary of the audit process that you underwent. If you can kind of give a couple of thoughts, convey a couple of thoughts of what that was like and what you need to have ready, what was looked at.
Well, like we talked about, Sanjeev mentioned it about the inherited controls and using a lot of the SOC 2 analysis, a lot of the document review to be able to highlight where our documents meet the requirements to answer particular questions within the NIST framework or CMMC framework, and being able to cite what PreVeil does, the controls that they have in place for their software, your software, excuse me, and being able to say, okay, for access management, I have PreVeil does this. From identity management, I have, PreVeil does that. From encryption, end-to-end encryption or whatnot, PreVeil does this. And being able to point to what PreVeil actually does, being able to validate what PreVeil has provided for us on information to say, if I'm going to inherit controls from somewhere, it's going to come for these, 75 controls is going to come from the implementation here, and these policies support the implementation that I put in place for PreVeil. So it is heavily archive driven, being able to get the artifacts put together, which is a great deal of what is provided when you work or partner with your company, and also partner with eFortresses to help us put that together in their platform, in their SaaS platform, to say, this is where it all is, this is where it looks like, this is how you answer your SSP, this is how your POEM looks, and being able to have that in a very quick and efficient manner that, took months out of the equation for us.
Orly, if I may be allowed to add to it, I mean, the audience from the questions has a varied background, and many of us live in the security and compliance world and take a few things for granted about SSPs and so forth. If I may be allowed
Go ahead.
to make a reiteration of the essential elements. Your question was very well answered by Kevin as an expert on how do you prepare for an audit. But I'd like to give a simpler, version for the broad audience set. So in essence, what the CMMC program is asking you is, it says, look, here's the 110 controls that you must meet. And you got to demonstrate to us that you meet those. We had John Ellis, who's the head of DIBCAC, the Department of Defense's audit agency's head, say that this is an open book test. You know the questions in the test, and you've got to go and provide the answers to that. And you've got months and months available to go and prepare for it. So how do you answer those questions? The essential way to demonstrate, because they want to verify that you meet those controls, is what's called a document called a system security plan. So you've got to develop a system security plan. It says, control 1, here's what I am using to meet the control 1. For example, they could be using PreVeil to meet that, or a policy or procedure that they have written, or user training to meet it. And so you write it down, here's what I need to go and meet this control. And then you demonstrate further evidence. That's what Kevin called artifacts, that if there is further evidence that's required that says, show me not only the policy and procedure, but further evidence that you meet that control, that's what's called an artifact. So the system security plan you can think of as a document that has 110 controls, the policies, the technologies that you're using to satisfy those controls, and then evidence in the form of artifacts. And so to fill up that document, that's what I was saying, that when, for example, you use PreVeil, you'll meet the documentation requirements either fully or partially for 85 of those controls. Why partially? Because PreVeil helps you meet those requirements, but in many cases, there's a shared responsibility. We provide you with the tool, but you also have to use the tool and have some part of responsibility for how you use the tool. So you've got to provide documentation for your part of the shared responsibility. But what's nice is you get those 85 controls addressed in your system security plan. Then come eFortresses, and it helps you write your part of the shared responsibility and the parts that we don't address with PreVeil. And so once you're there, you got your system security plan fully buttoned down. And that's why I wanted to sort of emphasize, that's your evidence either to an internal auditor or to an external auditor that you are meeting compliance. And I wanted to amplify that for part of the audience that is unfamiliar with some of the language and jargon of what's an SSP and an artifact.
Thank you for that, Sanjeev. Sanjeev, and the rest of the team, Kevin and Taiye, we have a lot of questions that came in and through the signups and also online through the Q&A. Let me just get through a couple of that I thought were interesting. One was, and I'll send this first to Taiye, and then I'll send the question to you, Sanjeev. Taiye, one question I got was, what can a small company, 5 people or less, do to keep costs affordable when they're being asked to comply with CMMC, but don't actually handle CUI?
Wow, that's a really good question. So I actually have 2 SMBs that are in that boat right now. And luckily, they're both 100% cloud-based. And they're also 100% virtual. So all their employees work from home from different parts of the US. So I would say, just get advice, right? If obviously I'm going to do a proud plug for eFortresses. If you go to our website and you visit cmmcscorecard.com, schedule an advisory session, and I'll personally make sure that on that call, and we'll kind of walk you through some of the, what I call, not shortcuts, but I would say fast track that would allow you as leveraging the PreVeil solution as well as our solution, which streamlines the process. But the first thing you really need to understand is you need to understand the shared responsibility model that Sanjeev mentioned earlier. So it's like, it's like you're renting an apartment complex in a high-rise building, right? You don't leave your doors wide open and your windows wide open, even though they may have a receptionist, they may have security gates and cameras and everything everywhere. They may even have access control into your elevator. Let's say you're on the 10th floor. You want to understand what you're responsible for and what you're accountable for. And once we help you navigate all that, through our subscription, which also includes some advisory support, you'd have a clearer picture of, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's going to be as painless as possible, especially for a company your size. If you're not handling CUI today, you can still pretend like you're handling CUI. So you basically will build your program and you're going to assume that your sensitive information is CUI. So these two customers that I mentioned, both SMBs, actually they're both MBEs, so they're minority business enterprises. So they're certified by the NMSDC. So shout out to NMSDC. I know IC is on the call. They actually want to get CMMC 2.0 certified. And we're pretty much, the first step is helping them navigate the shared responsibility model so they can know what they truly inherit. But the stuff that they don't inherit are really more the internal controls, right? Things like password management, in some cases, the HR policies, onboarding, offboarding, all those things you still have to do. You're not going to say, hey, just picking an example, Google is responsible for that, Microsoft is responsible for that. You still have to do it. So I would say that would be the first step. Feel free to schedule, 30-minute advisory call with me. Again, just go to eFortresses, click on the CMMC scorecard, and there's a 30-minute complimentary advisory you can sign up for. But the key, one takeaway is understand the shared responsibility model as quickly as possible, because that would kind of give you an idea of the level of effort it's going to take to get to CMMC 2.0 level 2.
I would add to the audience that sometimes, presentations, including the ones that I made, can often lead to a slight misunderstanding. What I have said continually, and I emphasize is correct, is that we can simplify this for you as a provider of a cloud service. But I want to emphasize that none of my comments should be interpreted as saying just using PreVeil as an example gets me to CMMC compliance. It is, in my judgment, virtually impossible for any small to medium business to almost go through level 2 compliance in CMMC 2.0 by themselves. And so an essential ingredient is a trusted CMMC SaaS or compliance expert like eFortresses. Because once you got that, you got a PreVeil platform, or if you would like, do a similar thing with GCC or GCC High, you got to find yourself, even using GCC or GCC High is not going to get you compliant. It's going to get you a good ways through, but you do need a compliance expert like eFortresses. And it's the combination of a strong platform, inherited controls, and a compliance expert that can get you there, precisely because of what Taiye just said, that the platform will give you a lot of inherited controls, but you still have responsibilities based on shared responsibilities on your side. And as a general business, you're not compliance experts. You don't know exactly like what is asked of you. And frankly, you shouldn't waste much time doing deep analysis. You got to run your own business. Simply get a consultant that's an expert in this, that has done this hundreds of times, like eFortresses, or any other consultant of your choice. but eFortresses is a great one because they understand your issues. And once you got that, then the combination of a strong platform deployed in hours and a strong consulting partner, that's your ticket to it. I still say that, CMMC 2.0 level 2 is still like sort of like climbing Mount Everest. It's really hard to do it on your own. You do need a great guide and a team to back you up, because you're not reaching the top just by sort of doing things on your own. And Kevin's example at SAWTST is, I think, an excellent demonstration of how this team approach can get you to the promised land in a finite amount of time.
Just to quickly add to Sanjeev's comment, very spot on, as always, Sanjeev. You also have to have a business case for CMMC 2.0 level 2, because if you, we're going to help minimize the cost, right? The combined solution, PreVeil and eFortresses, but it's still money you have to spend. And it's probably money that is you're taking from your bottom line, your profit, right? And for SMB, that's a big deal. That's money you could apply towards hiring more resources or scaling your business. So you have to be able to do the business case to say, okay, from a competitive advantage, differentiator, like Kevin mentioned, for SAWTST, is this going to allow us to go after DoD contracts? So that's the other thing we do on that vCISO service, would actually help the stakeholders position their solution or their company to be able to say, okay, once we get CMMC 2.0 level 2, how do we use that as a differentiator to go after DoD contracts? Which, quite frankly, for small, especially minority, veteran, service disabled veteran, women-owned businesses, there's a set aside, there are actually set aside contracts within federal government and even DoD for those types of businesses. They're not huge contracts, but they could actually give you a good opportunity to get through the door and be able to upsell additional services.
Sanjeev.
You're so astute in your, sensitivity to the predicament of the small business. I really, really appreciate it. And at our end, we do say that, PreVeil is a great platform to protect your, information just as a business, protection. It's great for CMMC level 2, but do your own analysis. If you, for example, are in the situation where you don't bid for contracts that have CUI, then even we would say to you that work with eFortresses to determine the business case. And if the business case isn't there for you to be at level 2, don't invest in the PreVeil solution. We would still like you to have it just to protect yourself from ransomware, etc. But if it doesn't make sense, then eFortresses will guide you to it, that you don't need to be using PreVeil. And we're okay with that. We're absolutely fine with your business doing what's best for it. And if we are a solution that can be of assistance, be happy to be part of it. And if not, that's absolutely appropriate.
All right, let's see if we can just get through one or two more questions here. There's a ton here. I'm looking at 22 questions. So here's one for you, Sanjeev. It says, if we use Office 365 for email, will CUI email using PreVeil be stored in Office 365, or will the emails be stored in AWS GovCloud, but still appear to be in the O365 environment?
Yeah, what's nice is that the PreVeil solution works with your Gmail or Exchange or Office 365. And with one click, you can basically add PreVeil to your Outlook or G Suite Gmail browser. And from a compliance perspective, to you, you're sending and receiving emails just from the platform that you're used to, for example, Office 365. But those emails aren't stored in the Office 365 cloud. What's happening is, even though you've got the same email address, those emails and of course all files in PreVeil Drive are stored on the AWS GovCloud, which is a FedRAMP High cloud. So it's the highest level of security and compliance that's available to you. And what's also nice is you get inherited controls from storing it on AWS GovCloud, because AWS GovCloud is designed for FedRAMP High, for IL45. And the reason Microsoft itself doesn't allow you to be on O365 is that it advocates the use of its GCC or GCC High Cloud, because you cannot basically use the O365 cloud. And if you want to get technical, one of the reasons why is because it doesn't meet DFAR 7012C through G, where you cannot get, in the event of a breach, information for the breach because it's commingled with everybody else's, with everybody else's accounts that is on the commercial cloud. So it's a long-winded answer, but I'll summarize. Your emails and files are on AWS GovCloud, but they appear to you in O365 or Gmail or G Suite to be right in your own application.
All right. I think we have time for just one last question here before we're at the top of the hour. And I think this will kind of just give people a little bit of an explanation of, kind of scoping where they have CUI. This is a question that came in and said, do you need to make your entire network compliant, or can you stand up a small sub-network designed just for CUI only data? Taiye or Sanjeev?
Yeah, I think it's a great benefit to you not to make your compliance boundary your entire organization and your entire network. We would recommend that you, in essence, determine who gets CUI and essentially have what's called an enclave of users within your organization that handle CUI. And that's the support for that capability is also one of the ways in which you save money, because you don't need to have, for example, PreVeil or compliance, mandates that apply to the entire organization, but they just apply to the folks within the organization. And this has important benefits. I mean, if you are, say, 100% organization, you don't need to have, advanced systems on all of them, but if only 30 people handle CUI, that's what you'll need. Or if you are a big enterprise, but only have a division that handles, defense work, then you could restrict your compliance boundary to just that division.
All right. With that, I think we are just about at the top of the hour. Let me just share the final bit of this contact information so you know how to get in touch with today's speakers. Here we go. All right, so contact information for Taiye, Lambo at eFortresses.com. For Kevin, it's kevin.dodson at SAWTST, and Sanjeev is Sanjeev at PreVeil.com. We will be sharing this deck and the presentation and an email coming out tomorrow. So look for all who signed up for today's webinar. You'll be getting that information in your inbox. And so I'll just start with you, Taiye, and see if you have any last words before we sign off.
Thank you so much, Orly and Sanjeev and Kevin again. I think that my parting thought would be a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So take the first step, right? Whatever that first step or one step means to you, take it today. Don't procrastinate. CMMC is a real thing. It's going to happen. It may just be, slow start. It will happen. If you plan to be in the supply chain for the defense industrial base or the DoD, it's not going away. And take that one step or first step.
Kevin, any final words?
Yeah, don't let it scare you. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with just one step. Take the time to follow up with, either of these vendors, get some very solid factual information, and understand that no one's trying to trick you into anything as an SMB or SME. You guys need to really take it serious, but take your time, get some good consultation. It was very helpful to me to have some trusted advisors to get this done. So I would encourage you to do that. And if you want some honest opinions, please reach out to me. I will definitely provide whatever information I can to support you. That's it.
All right, then Sanjeev, you want to?
I think, I'll just conclude by reiterating that the CMMC 2.0 program is truly now SMB friendly, because if you handle CUI, you're already required to meet those 110 controls. You've signed a document that says you meet them. And if you signed it and don't meet them, then the government has multiple programs right now to go after folks. So the nice thing is, by starting to take the simple steps to meet compliance, you can both address your current contract obligations. And when you do that, CMMC 2.0 compliance happens as if by magic. I also want to conclude by saying that what's most important is what Kevin said, having trusted advisors. And there is no path to either current or future compliance without a trusted advisor. And I think Taiye is an excellent resource because he understands, the challenges faced by the SMBs. So start your journey by, working with them, or certainly, reaching out to us at PreVeil. We'd be happy to be of assistance to you. You're on mute, Orly.
I was on mute. I was on mute that time. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You are free to roam the country, and look for a follow-up email in your inbox. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.